Hi, Matt. Welcome back to the podcast. We are so excited to have you back. You were one of our most popular episodes last year.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
And we can't wait to talk about intervention today. And especially, when we talked to you before, it sounded like you're going to talk about intervention that really actually works to meet the needs of students. So we can't wait to dive into that.
Great. Thanks.
All right, so Matt, you've done some amazing work with something called the skill by treatment interaction framework. That sounds really scary. You're going to help us work through it today, but that's grounded in the learning hierarchy. Now, we know that, again, it sounds a little bit academic, but really it's just about how people learn and what we can do when learning breaks down.
hmm Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, so let's just start with the basics of this. Lori gave it all the technical names, but just walk us through, how does learning typically happen and we are always talking about literacy, but this really applies to everything. So how
hmm
does learning typically happen, and what can go wrong along the way?
Well, when I work with teachers, I hear them talk about this a lot. They'll have a kid and they'll recognize the kid's problem. Like, I had a kid just like that 2 years ago, and I did this research-based intervention and it worked really well. And so I'm gonna try that with this kid, and it didn't work. So for years, that's fascinated me. There's something about the individual kid that makes the intervention effective or not. And for decades, we've been trying to study the individual kid more. Like, is it a working memory issue that's the problem? Is it a processing speed issue? And we've never found research that shows those types of variables adequately differentiate intervention effects. So a really long story, made very short, was a few years ago, I was part of a grant, and myself, Lori Hellman, and Jennifer McComas at University of Minnesota, and we had each roles. We were building an MTSS, and Lori was tier 1, and Jennifer was tier 3, and I was tier 2, basically. So Jennifer developed this really cool way to do a brief experimental analysis to see what problems kids were having. And so what we would do is we'd come in and assess a couple hypotheses. As kids are learning, as anyone learns, anyone in the world, anything you learn, you go through 4 very specific phases. This is Herring and Edenall in 1978, if interested. But you go through very specific phases. First of all, you start off with the acquisition phase. You've got to learn it. You've got to do initial learning. And you have to first become accurate. And the best way to build accuracy is through modeling and explicit instruction. So build accuracy. Then, once you're sufficiently accurate, then we have to worry about how quickly do you do it. That's your second phase. You go from initial learning, acquisition, to fluency building, proficiency building phase where you really got to get faster. And the goal there is practice, 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 get them faster at the skill. Now, teachers push back to me all the time. Do we really need kids to do it faster? Well, no. What we need is for kids to do it with automaticity. If you can't do it with automaticity, you can't generalize the skill. How do we do it? How do we know if it's automatic? Speed. So yes, we do have to get them faster, but that's really just so we know it's automatic. And then once they learn it in the first place, then they're fluent in it, then they can generalize it. And so if they aren't fluent, they can't take it and put it in a different setting or different stimulus or different, well, they can't do that. So we have to first get them accurate, fluent, and then they can generalize it. Once they can generalize it, that's when you use information to solve problems. And I know as teachers, that's what we want our kids to be, right? We want our kids to be solving problems. But if they're still in the initial learning, they can't do that. So we have to build modeling, build accuracy, then build speed, help them to generalize it, and then they can apply it to solve problems. So to answer the initial question, which was what are the phases and where can things go wrong, any step along the way, something can go wrong. The kids might not learn it in the first place, or they might learn it, but then forget it the next day, or they might learn it and remember it, but then can't apply it, or they can't use it to solve problems. Now, with me as an interventionist, I'm not dealing with a kid who knows it, is fluent, can generalize it, just doesn't use it to solve problems. That's usually not a kid that people call me about. So I'm usually much more focused on those first 3 phases. So I really focus on, did they learn it in the first place? Did they remember it? And can they generalize it?
Matt, why do you think it's those first 3?
So that's a great question. I think, I've never tested this. I've studied this framework a number of times. I've never tested what I'm about to say. I think it's because if they get through those first two, most of the time they can generalize it and use it to solve problems. Why it happens in those first two, I don't know. But I think that's what they're not learning it well in the first place, or they can't retain it. And that's why they're not getting to the last two. Because that's not true. Almost any time I've got that kid through the fluency phase, they generally hit those last two really easily. Now, with generalization, with reading, I don't see it much. I haven't studied this, it's just experience. I don't see it being as much of a problem in reading, but it is occasionally a problem in math. The kid who knows, can do the skill fluently, but then they go to apply it and they really struggle with that. So we do see that there. So why that's the case, I don't know, but I do think most of the time kids are struggling to learn it in the first place or remember it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you mentioned that teachers like often see this research and then they try it with students and it works for some and it works for others. And I just wanted to mention that can be really frustrating for teachers, to feel like you're doing what the research said to do and it's not working. And I just wanted to say that so that we can say, like, as we talk today, like, we're really going to talk about the reasons why it might not be working for certain students. It's not because the research is bad and you want to throw it all away, but because things are happening for those students, and we're going to actually give some things that they can do to help those students so you don't feel so lost.
I'm so glad you said that, because remember, most of the intervention research is done with 50 kids or something. And what we don't see, and we see on average it works really well, but when you look at the data, there might be 5 kids in that group it didn't work well with, or something like that. But that doesn't really come out in the data. So that's why much of the research I do is single case design, where I actually look at individual kids. And by the way, so we developed this, I first wrote about this in 2010. Jennifer and I and Lori and I, we sort of fleshed this out for a reason I'll talk about in a few minutes, around the same time period, around 2010. Not long ago, maybe 5 years ago, a teacher called me. A teacher was in a different state, called me up and said, hey, look, I've been doing sound partners. Sound partners is a good intervention. I talk about sound partners a lot. That's why he thought to call me. And at the same time, in 2017, Lynn Fuchs had this great article come out about how to intensify interventions. And she gives like 5 or 6 strategies. He was just picking 1 or 2 strategies and trying them, and they didn't work. And he called me up frustrated. He's like, okay, Burns, I've been trying this thing. It's not working. I got this article. That didn't help. You talk about sound partners. What do I do? And his frustration was clear. I'm saying it a bit facetiously, but his frustration was clear. I said, okay, let's talk to the kids. And we found in talking to him and seeing where they were and such, that he just happened to got unlucky and picked 2 ones that didn't match the kids' needs. And once we picked that one that did match the kids' needs, they took off.
Okay, can you just, before we dive in a little bit further, can you tell us what didn't match the kids' needs? Like, I'm just curious. I'm not going to be able to sleep until I know this.
Yeah. So let's talk about these 2 kids. So if you're not familiar with sound partners, it's a phonics intervention. It's oftentimes done one-on-one or in a small group. It's a fine intervention. Now, there were two kids we were talking about. Both had different issues, which worked out well for me. The first kid really struggled with initial learning. He would sit down with the kid and let's say taught the grapheme CH that day. I'm just making that up. And then at the end of the lesson would show the kid the CH and he couldn't do it. He didn't know what that meant. It's like, they just taught it to you 10 seconds ago and you interacted and did it, but now you don't know it. So for that kid, it wasn't really the skill he needed. He wasn't quite ready for that intervention yet. We had to back it up to really focus more on basic phonemic awareness, and then to teach the skill, add in a bunch more modeling, a lot more modeling. Now the second kid, when you're sitting there with him doing the lesson, at the end of the lesson, he did fine, no problem. Then the next day he forgot it. So for that kid, right after the lesson, practice. So after we're done, we had a little drill technique I used that once he taught him whatever skill that was that day, they practiced it over and over and over again, so he remembered it. So one kid needed more modeling. We had to match it up to the kid's skill level better. I shouldn't say word skill level. Match it up to the skill better. And that kid needed more basic phonemic awareness and then more modeling of the skill, whereas the other kid just needed a lot more practice. They just weren't retaining it very well. And by the way, those are the 2 most common that I see. I said that briefly a second ago, but those 2, just not learning it in the first place or just not remembering it.
Yeah, so you're really queuing me up. I feel like I set you up for this question. Now, when students need more support, which you just gave a great example of 2 students who did, teachers want to know, what do I need to do differently? What can I do differently? And I think what I'm hearing you say is it really depends where the breakdown is, right? Are they not learning it? Are they not remembering it? Or can they just not apply it yet? Are they struggling to apply it? Can you say more about that?
Yeah, as I said, in 2010 or so, we were doing this hour-long or so brief experimental analysis. And I went to the teacher afterwards and showed her what we did. And the teacher, I said, so this kid's really struggling to remember it. And the teacher said, I could have told you that. And as she's walking away, I thought about it, and I thought, she could have. She could have told me that. She could have easily told me that. Why didn't I think of that? And so then we had this idea where we started just asking the teacher these 3 things. So what I'm saying here, I'm stating the questions we ask. These are 3 things to look for when you're working with kids. Okay. Number 1, at the end of the lesson, can the kid do it? So you just taught it to him. You sit down. Can the kid do the skill you just taught him? And the answer to that is yes. Everything else is a no. Because oftentimes I ask teachers that, and they'll say, well, sometimes that's a no. Inconsistently, that's a no. It depends. Those are all no's. Yes, everything else is a no. So I ask, at the end of the lesson, can the kid do it? No. Okay, then that's where the breakdown's occurring. 2 options there. Either, well, I don't want to say either. First, assess the prerequisite skill. If you're focusing on fluency and the kid's not learning in the first place, go reassess their phonics. If you're assessing, if you're doing phonics and the kid's not learning it in the first place, go assess phonemic awareness. From experience, I haven't studied this. From experience, I think 75% of the time that's the issue. We're not doing the right skill. If they have the prerequisite skill and this is what we need to work on with this kid, then you have to add in a lot more modeling. So think of this. Is the kid, at the end of the lesson, can the kid do it? If the answer is no, assess the prerequisite skill. If it's low, back it up. If it's not, add in more modeling. Now, if the answer to that question at the end of the lesson, can the kid do it? And the answer is, yeah, sure, no problem. The next question is, the next day, does he remember it? Again, yes, everything else is a no. So he learns it in the first place, but the next day, he's forgotten it. Okay, that kid, practice, 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 practice. We talk a lot about dosage in intervention research, and dosage is important. But I'm not convinced dosage is always the answer. If the intervention is not working, doing it more may not help. But in this example, where the kid is getting it and they're just not retaining it, that's the most important thing you can do. Give that kid as much practice as possible. And then, at the end of the lesson, the kid learns it. The next day, does he remember it? Yeah. Okay, then is he struggling to apply it? And of the 3, that's the one that's the most hard, the most difficult. I just tell teachers, your best bet is teach it how you want them to use it. So, the kid learns the grapheme and then goes to read words and text. They struggle with it. Okay, well then really focus on teaching that grapheme within a word and then have the kid read sentences that contain that word as part of the lesson. So my advice to teachers going forward, interventionists going forward, look for those 3 things. Can they do it at the end of the lesson? And it doesn't have to be 100%, but I want to see 90%. Do the next day, do they remember it? And again, some forgetting is normal, but I want to see 90% retention. And then can they apply it? Just as you're working with kids, look for those 3 things. And if the intervention is not working, that will help you figure out how to intensify it.
So good. Okay. I feel like the thing that we go to the most is we skip over all the beginning stuff you said and we go right to the practice.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm hearing you say, more is not necessarily the answer. It depends on what the need is. And if we don't match this right instruction to the actual need, I'm assuming there could be some dire consequences, right? Like we're just having kids do more, but that's not really helping. You're actually, Matt, this is a silly analogy, but I teach fitness classes at the gym and I teach body pump. And, in that you lift weights. Well, it's like when people come to class week after week and, I do really correct them because I do think there's that we're not learning it in the first place. If they come week after week and every time they go to do a tricep kickback, they're bringing their arm all the way back into their shoulder. They could come week after week for the next 5 years. They're never going to define their triceps. So more practice isn't actually going to get them right? What we need, the outcome that we need. You got to stop to keep the tension. You got to stop that weight, like right at your hip, and keep, kick it back from there. You can't just fling it around. And so we could do more practice all day, but it's not going to matter. So if we're not matching the instruction to the actual need, it makes sense in like this greater context. But I think often in a classroom setting where it might be tricky sometimes to get to the actual need of the students, right? Like what I'm hearing you say is we really have to analyze this.
You really do. You really have to think about it. Now, so if I'm willing to accept that there's a lot of kids for whom just more practice might be helpful. But if they practice it wrong, that does more harm than good. First of all, if they're practicing and it's not helping, you're just wasting time. You're better off just to find out what the kid actually needs and really focus on that. So that's in and of itself. But number two, if it's a mismatch, you might actually do more harm than good. And so I think it's absolutely fine if teachers start with dosage first. But if that doesn't work, switch right away to something else. And you're better off to try and really pinpoint it at the beginning. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that makes so much sense. And I think, like you said, it's almost an instinct to just like keep doing more, but to not waste too much time doing that, right? If it's not working, and come back to what's really happening. I think told us that you have a story about a kindergarten class that you wanted to tell us about. That's an example of this. You gave us a lot of examples already, but I want to hear what this really looks like in a classroom.
Yeah, it wasn't a classroom, it was a kid. It was a kindergarten.
Okay.
And it was the first kid we built this with. So again, 2010 or so, we had a little guy who came to us in kindergarten as very low skills. And he had very little almost no phonemic awareness. We worked with him to build that, and he learned that really quickly. Now, in the meantime, we're also trying to work on just basic letter sounds. And I have never seen a kid struggle to learn the letter sounds like this kid did. And it was really kind of frustrating because you would literally teach him the letter T, right? You'd say this is T, it makes the T sound. And at the end of the lesson, okay, ready? What's this letter? This letter T, what sounds it make? And he'd look at it and go, like he had no idea. And we just taught it to him. He during the lesson did just fine. In fact, weeks we tried this, and we couldn't. Every time we taught the lesson, at the end we'd show him the card or whatever, and he never got it right. Literally, not even once. And so that's when we started to develop this framework. And we said we got to figure out how to help this kid. So we went back to basic learning theory, thought about these 3 phases. And so we sat down with this kid. Now the good news was he wasn't. The bad news was he wasn't learning it in the first place. He really struggled. And so because I just said at the end of the lesson couldn't do it. So we assessed his phonemic awareness, and we taught him his phonemic awareness. That was fine. So for this little guy, he really just needed a lot more modeling. So what we did with him is we took a picture. Now again, phonemic awareness helps so much. So for example, teaching the letter H, we showed him a picture of a hammer with a big H on it. He knew a hammer started with H, right? So I was able to show him the H and say this says hammer. Hammer starts with what? Good. This is the letter that makes that sound, basically. And I did that with him during the first lesson and taught him what it said. And at the end of the lesson, held up an H, and he looked at it and went, it was the first time he'd ever gotten one right. And it was really fun to see because the teacher and the kid's teacher and my literacy coach, part of this grant, were off to the side, and they saw that. They both looked at each other, exploded into tears. It was so cool. Now, the cool story about this little guy, though, is okay, we finally figured it out. And so we just kept doing that, right? We taught him, he learned all his letter sounds pretty quickly after that. But I make that sound, so I don't want to belittle this. Like, we spent weeks trying to work with this kid. We could not get any progress. And once we figured it out and went back to really, really focus on the scaffolding and modeling, that's when the kid finally took off. And there's a happy ending to the story. This was in his kindergarten year. It was a 3-year grant. During kindergarten, he was referred for special ed because he wasn't doing well. That was a reasonable referral. And they tested him and found out he had an IQ of like 65. I forget the exact number, but in the intellectual disability range. So they're at the IEP, and I was not at the IEP. I want to be really clear. I was not there. I'm telling you what I heard. At the IEP, the they said, okay, your son has an intellectual disability, we'd like to start special ed services. And the mom said, well, he can still keep doing this stuff with Dr. Birds and stuff, right? And the principal said no. Now, the reason the principal said no was this was a prevention grant project. It wasn't a special ed project. So that was the right answer, but we would have kept working with him. There's no way we would have shown this little kid away. But anyway, so the principal said no. And the mom thought about it and said, you know what? No, this is working. I want to keep trying this. We can come back next year if we need to, right? Like, yeah, of course. Yeah, no, let's keep trying this. And so well, at the end of second grade, I was cut right at the end. At the end of second grade, this little kid who was intellectual disability, and in this school they use the DRA, the NWA map, and Ames Web. All three of those, he was a grade level reader by the end of second grade. And it took a lot of work. I don't want to, but this little kid was supposedly an intellectual disability. By just really focusing on what he needs, we got him there. Now it took a lot of work and it took time, but we got him there. We saw huge growth. Once we figured it out, we kept seeing really huge growth. It just took him a couple of years to catch up to grade level. So
yeah, that's amazing.
It was fun.
And because you found exactly what he needed, I mean, that's the key, because I could see that going poorly. Even I'm thinking about it because next year I'm actually going to volunteer with my son's kindergarten teacher.
Cool.
So I'll be right there with the kindergartners with their letter sounds. But I think I would have almost assumed it was a phonemic awareness issue, right? And like you said, you went and phonemic awareness was not an issue, right? So you can't even just assume like, oh, well, then I have to go back to this other skill that they must not have, right? You have to see if that's what they have or not. I'm wondering though, for specifically since we're talking about kind of phonics instruction right at the moment, are there any other ideas you have for that modeling part? Because I could see that's where people might get stuck. Like, okay, what else do I do to model this? There's only so many things to show them the sound.
So I did it's another grant I have. I'm going around observing classrooms, and I observed a kindergarten classroom, and it was a great teacher. Everything was cool, but she had little kindergartners come up and sit on the floor, and she goes, "Okay, kids, we're going to learn something new," and she put up a letter of a T. A picture of a T, on the smartboard. Say, okay, who knows what this is? And they all kind of stared at her for like 10 seconds. Then they're kindergartners, right? So they start getting out kindergartning, right? They start screwing around, raising their hand, saying totally irrelevant stuff, And so she, okay, this is a letter. Who knows what letter it is? Same thing happened for about 10 seconds. They're all getting kind of squirmy. They're kindergartens. And then she says, okay, this is a letter T. Who knows what sound it makes? Now, at this point, I might have given up, right? Like, they don't know what it is. They don't know the name of it. They're not going to know the letter name, or the letter sound, but she still tried it. Same thing, 10, 15 seconds of the kids getting kindergartnery, and then she says, okay, this makes the T sound. Now, I would have done this. This is, okay, class, friends, whatever she called them, I forget. We're going to learn a new letter. This is the letter T. Everyone say it. The kids would say T. I'd say, okay, T makes the T sound. Everyone say that. Kids would say T. Good. Okay, let's say it again. T makes the T sound, right? What sound? Kids say T. Good. Like in the word top. Top starts with T. T is T. Turn to your partners. Think of a word that starts with T, right? Like, that took about 15 seconds, and they would have learned it much better. So I'm answering your question, Melissa, which is, yeah, I get it, but you'd be surprised how often that step gets skipped in the learning. Yeah. And we talk now about productive failure. And there's a meta-analysis, I can pull up the citation if you want it, but there's a meta-analysis that's found for math that productive failure had a positive effect. And a moderate effect. So I went and looked at the study in more detail. And what I found was that it was math, and some of the dependent variables were things like physics and chemistry and et cetera. And when you look at the age groups, the largest effects were for students in undergrad or maybe high school. But when you looked at elementary school, grades 2 through 5, the effect size was negative. Did more harm than good. So productive failure, remember those phases of learning? Acquisition, fluency, generalization, problem solving, adaptation. It's that final phase where productive struggle might be helpful. It is not helpful in initial learning. And so in high school kids learning chemistry or something, sure, that's a different conversation. Little kids learning their letter sounds or whatever it is, no, you have to have modeling first. So I do think oftentimes reminding teachers of the importance of modeling, going back and just simply saying first can really be the issue. Now, I will say, like for this little boy we mentioned earlier, the kindergartner, we provided more scaffolding by giving that letter, the picture of a hammer. So I do think teachers can brainstorm ways to model more, and I don't think any is worse than others when it comes to modeling, as long as they're showing it first and having the kid immediately responding and correcting any errors right then, it should be fine. But there are also other ways to do it. But I think oftentimes we've got to get back to really just doing actual modeling during initial learning.
Yeah, that's really important. You're making me think about the older students. Do you think it's because they're more application? Like, for example, if I was doing a chemistry lab, I would have had to teach something beforehand as the teacher in order to get my students ready for that lab. Or they would have had to read something beforehand or prepare. They don't just walk into that lab and willy-nilly just go for it. So there is that element of when they are doing, I'm just thinking of an example of when they might fail, right? If they were having productive failure, could be in a situation like a chemistry lab.
That's what I was thinking, Lori. I'm like, they have at least 12 years of school behind them.
Sure.
Like...
And knowledge. Is that like,
right,
Matt,
right.
do you think it's more because it's the application piece at that point?
I do, yes. Well, I think it absolutely comes to it. Now, I'm sure there's some initial learning that has to happen in a chemistry class. I'm sure that's true. But it's at that upper level, it's much more. I mean, think about what you might think about the test you take, elementary school versus older grades. Oftentimes it's multiple choice elementary school. It's essay in high school. Why? Because you're tapping into the application side of it. Essays are application. So I think you're exactly right. I think some of those more advanced courses with older kids, it's all about application.
Yeah. I mean, okay, even if we think about something as simple as us as adults, baking or making a meal, we have prerequisite skills there. I know how to measure with a measuring cup. I know how to cut with a knife. I can put all that together, and there will be some element of failure. Perhaps I burn the garlic, but I live and learn right next time. But
exactly.
It's more that application piece. I've got the prereqs to get me to the point of I can actually try this out now.
Yep. And I think the classic example is driver's training. You're not going to use productive failure in driver's training. Like, you put the kid in a challenging situation perhaps, but you've already assessed and know they have the basic driving skills. Right,
yes.
Before you, and you're going to teach it to them, have them practice it in a range, simulations, etc. Then they go on the road, right? It's you don't apply it until you can do it.
So something I'm thinking a lot about is writing instruction. How this, like Melissa brought up the idea of writing an essay. So we're thinking about writing instruction, and I mean, early writing is definitely different than more advanced writing or older writers. So how do we help a student who's just getting started versus one who's trying to write maybe independently but needs support organizing or elaborating? Because I could see this framework being really helpful.
Well, I agree. Now, I've never studied it for writing. I've studied it for math and reading, but never writing. But my three sort of go-tos, if they're struggling to learn it in the first place, I go back to early writing skills. And there's a program called Early Writing Project at the University of Minnesota and University of Missouri. I'm not sure. I think it's probably on both their websites. Early Writing Project. It's all about how to do that initial instruction in basic writing. The application, and now I will say I'm hypothesizing that we'll see application breakdowns in writing more than in reading. But then that's where we really drive into SRSD, the self-regulated strategy development. Those strategies are ideal for helping kids apply writing skills. So that's if you've got a kid who's really struggling to apply writing skills, that's a go-to I use quite a bit. And in between, it's just practice. But stuff like practicing copying, practicing writing sentences, that type of stuff is sort of in between. It does apply well to writing. And by the way, I know this is literacy, but I really kind of started on this in math many years ago. I was teaching kids I do this research on something called incremental rehearsal, which is a really intensive way for kids to practice stuff, for kids with memory difficulties to remember things. And it works really well. But so I wanted to try this with kids with intellectual disability to teach them their math facts. And so I was simply teaching, single-digit multiplication. 3 kids, late elementary school, intellectual disability. And they learned them no problem. It was easy. And I went back to the teacher and said, hey, look, here are the data. The kids did great. And the teacher went, oh, that's fine, but that's not what they need. Like, what do you mean? Because they need to understand it better conceptually. Okay, well, show me what you mean. So she had the kid come over and gave him 3 times 3. And I'm going to try and make some, I know this is audio, so I try and make some audio sound. And the kid counted on his fingers. He went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Not that loudly. But then wrote down the answer 9. And the teacher said, see, he needs to understand it better conceptually. So, well, wait a minute. Isn't going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in your head showing he understands it conceptually? So that really got me started on this line of how to individualize math interventions based on where the kids are. And it follows kind of the same framework, except conceptual understanding is the phonemic awareness of math, right? If they really struggle with basic numeracy, go back and look at basic conceptual understanding. And it worked really well. So I've never studied with writing, studied with the other two, and it applies.
Yeah, since we're talking about where this applies, I'm wondering how it applies to comprehension, because I can really see it with our, the phonics skills and getting more fluent with them. But I'm wondering, and we always talk about how, comprehension is different. It's much more nuanced. Like, there's so many things that go into comprehension. If students are struggling with comprehension, could you use this framework with that as well?
Yes. So the more discrete the skill, the easier it is to apply, okay, to apply this framework. So yes, it makes much more sense, but for phonics than like comprehension. But remember, comprehension is discrete skill. So if a kid's not you're trying to teach them comprehension strategy, for example, and they're struggling to learn it in the first place, go assess the prerequisite skills. And I'll tell you from experience, I was about to say 9 times out of 10, which seems a little high, but I bet it's not wrong. Most of the kids I work with in schools who have comprehension deficits don't have comprehension deficits. They have fluency deficits.
Thank you for saying that.
When we assess the prerequisite skill and we see it's a fluency issue, when you really focus on that fluency issue, their comprehension is better.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then and so that's learning it in the first place. Then you have a kid who, they learn the strategy, for example. See, what I've just done, by the way, I should say this. I've just taken comprehension and made it a discrete skill because I'm talking about a strategy. So if I'm trying to teach a strategy, it works. If I'm trying to teach comprehension, other than assessing prerequisite skills, it doesn't work quite as well. So you have to first then make it a discrete skill. And so I want to make it a strategy that they're learning. So yeah, they can do it in the first place or not. If they can't, look at their fluency skills. If they can, if they have good fluency, then maybe do more modeling and let them use spend more time teaching them the strategy to begin with, then more time practicing it, and then actually have them go and apply it. And one thing a study we did was we found a bunch of middle schoolers. They were trying to teach comprehension strategies to the ones from reciprocal teaching, paraphrasing, summarizing, questioning. Anyway, and they taught it to them, and the kids did fine during the lesson. And then, but then when they went to go use it out in the skill, it didn't improve their comprehension. When they went to go apply it, it didn't improve their comprehension. So we came in and said, they can do it accurately when they're sitting there, and guess what? The next day they still remember it. They just struggle to apply it. So we started giving them feedback. After we had them read whatever it was and answer comprehension, we asked them these questions, a series of questions about if they're using the strategies or not, and used that to help them understand, I could use that there. I should have done that there. And then their comprehension took off. So I think the more discrete the skill, the better it works for this framework, but comprehension is a series of discrete skills. Just pick out which one you're focusing on.
Yeah, so what I just heard you say was metacognition and application in that case, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, in that case, yes, metacognition for application is really important. Yeah.
All right, so we also want to talk about assessments, even though I know we could talk about assessments forever, but I do want to just, in the frame of what we're talking about, talk about assessments, because sometimes teachers feel like they have so much data from so many different assessments, it's hard to even know what to do with it all. But I'm hearing you, even through this conversation, say things like, just looking at what they do at the end of the lesson, right? That's an assessment there. Or even you said at one point, the teacher, of course she would know that, right? Just by watching her student, she would know that. So I'm wondering about, between all the assessments they're giving, between watching what their students are doing every day, how can teachers use assessment data to figure out where this breakdown is happening so they know where to intervene in the right way?
So the type of data used depends on the question being answered. And when I'm talking about, so if I'm using the data to identify a child with a learning disability or to determine proficiency in a state test, which could be linked to being retained. Those are really important decisions. We need very rigorous data for that. But when I'm talking about modifying instruction or intervention, I don't need as rigorous data for that. So observational data can be really helpful. And so there's a couple things you can look at, and accuracy is important. So I want to see if a student can't do it with at least 90% accuracy, I'm not going to let them practice it independently. I want to see 90% accuracy first. So, what's the program that does this? Road to Reading, I think, is the one that does this. At the end of every lesson, and their lessons aren't just one session; they're over a couple days. They give the kid 10 words that contain what they just taught them, and they have to read those words and see if they can get them right or not. To me, those are invaluable data because you can see if 10 is a good number, 90% is my cutoff. So if they get 9 or 10 right, they learned it. If not, they didn't. So those types of assessment data, if you're really worried about the kid, at the end of the lesson, give them this. It becomes a measurement issue because if I give them 5 and they get one wrong, that's 80%. If I give them 10, they get one wrong, that's 90%. So if they got one wrong out of 10, I'm happy. One wrong out of 5, I'm concerned. So that's why it gets to be a little difficult. But teachers can also use what they know about the kids as well if they want to use 5. But give them some sample of the behavior and see if they can do it with 90% accuracy. If they can, move on. Now the next day, give them that same assessment and see if they can do it with 90% accuracy again. So when I say assessment, I mean a list of words that contain the grapheme you just taught them, a spelling words that you just taught them, those types of things, and just see if they can accurately do it 90%. If they can do it right after the lesson, they've got it. If they can do 90% the next day, they've got it. So those are the types of assessments that I think are really, really important for intervention design.
Matt, do you mean literally the same the next day, the same words?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
100%. Yep.
I feel like every teacher listening would be like,
keep it simple.
Does he mean the same, exact same, or should I change it?
No, I'm glad you asked. No, I do, yes, keep it simple. So it's really interesting to watch. As a researcher, I sometimes get excited about bad things, and I always feel guilty afterwards. Like if I'm going to work with a kid and I find a kid with a really severe problem, like, oh great, let's dive in, and I realize, I just celebrated the kid having a problem. I don't mean that. So sometimes I get excited about things that might come across as strange. But yeah, I want to keep it really, really simple. And I've seen kids, when I say use the words in same words the next day, I see basically bimodal. I see two things happening. Either the kids fly through it no problem, or they get like 2 right. You never get the kid, I shouldn't say never, you hardly ever see a kid get 8 when the day before they got 9. That hardly ever happens. And so if they're worried about practice effect, well, okay, that's a legitimate concern. I'm just telling you from my experience, it's hardly ever a factor. They either know it or they don't. Like the next day they remember 9 again, or 10, or they remember 2, or less.
So you're really just catching those kids that had it the one day and then the next day it's gone.
It's apparent. It is clear. That's the thing I love about working with kids is they tell you what they need. We just have to do a better job of listening. And the kid, the kid will, next day, if they will get 2 out of 10, they're clearly showing you what they need, and they will do that. They will clearly show you what they need. We just have to do a better job of listening.
That's awesome. All right. I love that. This is such a great tip for teachers listening. So if teachers are listening and they love this idea, Matt, and they're like, I want to do this in my classroom. I want to replicate what Matt Burns is talking about. Where should they start?
Well, there's a couple, you mean resources?
Sure. Yeah.
A couple that are easy to get. We have an article coming out that tested this. We've done this a couple times, but the most recent one is in a journal called Learning Disabilities, a multidisciplinary journal. It's there. We also have an article in the Communique, which is published by the National Association of School Psychologists, easy to get. We have an article coming out in Perspectives, the IDA journal about this, so that's there. And also my YouTube channel, I talk about it on my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search Matthew Burns. I'm the first Matthew Burns that comes up, which I'm very proud of. And anyway, I have a couple of videos on there about how to do this as well.
Okay, great. And we'll be sure to link those in our show notes. So if you're listening, you can go to the show notes, click them, find Matt.
And then,
All good.
email me. I'm happy to help. If you, like this one teacher who called me up out of the blue, um, I spent quite a bit of time with that teacher, but usually it's a 5-10 minute conversation. Email me. I'm happy to try and support that. But just, I mean, it's 3 questions. At the end of the lesson, can they do it? The next day, do they remember it? And can they apply it? So really, if you just start there and really identify what the kid needs, there are many ways you could probably match that. And I'm not convinced one is better than the other. There are lots of ways, although, oh no, I'm going to say this. Oh my gosh, I almost gave bad advice. All practice is not equal. There is bad practice, there is more effective practice. In order to be effective practice, there has to be repetition, has to be generation, and I would argue interleaving. So repetition means obviously you got to practice it more than once. So again, coming back to math facts, I had a teacher, like 4th grade, I think it was. I'd finally convinced her that math facts were important. So she was going to have her kids practice math facts. So they sat in the room, and they all sat there, and she would point to a kid and say, Jimmy, 3 times 3. And they each had their little math fact sheet, numbers going across the top and the side, and you just go top, 3 times 3, find the 3 on the side, and it's 9. They all had that. So little Jimmy would go 3, 3, 9. 9, good, okay, thanks. Tommy, what's 4 times 4? 16. Good, 16, thanks. Billy. And that was almost a complete waste of time. First of all, there's no repetition. Just saying it once doesn't help. I shouldn't say it doesn't help, but it's not, you gotta say it more than once, obviously. And by the way, if I say, okay, Jimmy, what's 3 times 3? What's every other kid doing? Nothing, right? Didn't call me, good.
Yeah.
So not getting repetition. Yeah, exactly. Number 2, you have to generate the answer yourself. Recall practice effect. One of the best ways to retain things is just to practice recalling it over and over again. But looking at an answer and reading it is not generating the answer. You have to generate the answer yourself. And so they have to look at whatever the stimulus is, like look at the T, and they have to be the one to say T. You can't say it for them. So if I were to have show a kid the T 5 times, and every time I said T as they listened, or every time they said T, they're going to retain it way better if they're the ones that said the sound. And then lastly, interleave, practice multiple skills at once. And I like to have, I think it's more effective if you have easy or review built in there. So if I'm teaching you T, when I'm practicing T, I'm going to have 4 other sounds that you already know as we practice them together. So repetition, interleaving, and generation. Those 3 things really should be there. And so if I'm a teacher and I know my kid learns it in the first place, but just needs more practice with it, all right, let's see, anything I do that builds in repetition with generation and some interleaving is going to be fine. And there's 10 ways to do it, if not more. And it's probably going to be fine, as long as you follow those 3 rules. And then generalization, there's 100 ways to do that. And I love working with teachers and teams to see the creative ways they come up with helping kids build for transfer, build for generalization, teach it how you want them to use it. And that's oftentimes really fun. Teachers have fun with that one. I think it's the hardest one. It's the one teachers think have the most fun with. So yeah, just you want to start this, just start looking for this. Looking for it at the end of the lesson, can the kid do it? The next day they do remember it, and then can they apply it? And what you do with that information can vary as long as you're matching what the kid needs.
Well, way to leave us with some gems there at the end. Those are great. Thank you. And I will be emailing you if I have any kindergartners next year that I'm having trouble with. But no, thank you so much for this. Lori and I really did, after we talked to you at the pre-call, we're like, oh my gosh, this totally changed our way of thinking about intervention. And it seems so simple, but the way you framed it just really is helpful, and I'm really hoping it's helpful for a lot of teachers out there as well. So thank you for sharing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.